In this lesson, we're going to learn how to model the spring for our car. Alright, so we've created the wheel assembly and the axle, and now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create the spring assembly just to get this started to be put together completely. So I'm going to start out with just a simple cylinder to create the overall hydraulic shaft that we would see in this object. So in my front view, or on my left view, I'm sorry, if I hit L on the keyboard, I'm going to go ahead and just drag out a cylinder, and its radius is going to be around maybe 2, okay, and then I'll give it a height of around maybe 18 or so. Okay, so just get close, and then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, okay, so that way it's straight up and down. Just make sure you have your snap tool turned on, okay, for your rotation. I'm going to go ahead and put this right down here next to my wheel, but let me go ahead and move the shell or just hide it. So I'm going to right click and hide selection, and let's pull this down into position. Now this particular spring is kind of hard to see because it's hidden behind our reference image, and then also in our front view, if I hit F on the keyboard, you really can't see it that much either. So we kind of have to make a few educated guesses on how large this should be. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it right down here to right about midway on the wheel. Okay, so right about here. And then I'm going to adjust my height and pull that up to right about here. So around 25 or 26 is a good height. Now at this point, what we would want to do is go ahead and rotate this to where it matches the reference image. Now you don't have to be absolutely exact on this. Okay, you can be fairly close. We're going to have to model to the actual model itself, so there might be some slight changes from the model to the reference image. Just remember that the reference image is just that. It's just a guideline. We're going to get our major shapes, but as we continue to model, we have more and more freedom to create what we need, and we may have to make changes to fit our particular needs at that time. So I'm going to also take my radius down on this, and let's go to maybe about 1.5. That might be a good place to start. So now that I have this, let me convert it to an editable poly. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to also take the sides down on this. I'm going to go to 8. 8 is usually a good amount to stick with because it's low enough to work with and still gives us the shape that we need for cylinders. So going back to our left view, hitting L on the keyboard, I'm going to go ahead and convert it to an editable poly. And then I'm going to grab my scale tool, and I'm going to scale this down. Now whenever you're modeling with geometry that is kind of off, its angle is a little bit different than straight up and down or perfectly horizontal, what we want to do is we want to switch our reference coordinate system from view to local. And you'll notice that the scale tool is angled exactly with my object. So now I can hold shift and scale this down in the Z, and you'll see that this is creating a brand new object here. And I'm going to make sure that this is a copy and hit OK. And you'll see that that has scaled perfectly in line with this angled object. Okay, so still under the local view, I'm going to scale this out to make this the outside portion of our hydraulic system. So this is actually going to go down into this part of the casing. So looking at our left view, there's a couple of things that you'll want to change about this. First and foremost, if we hit F3, you'll see that this part of the cylinder comes all the way down to the end, and we don't really want something like that. So I'm going to scale this down on its own without holding shift, and then I'm going to move it with my local reference coordinate system. I'm going to move it back up to get that size that I need there. Okay, so that's matching up pretty well. All right, so now that I have those pieces ready to go, let's go ahead and create the spring that's going to be on the outside of this. So to get started with this, we're going to use a shape, and we're going to be using a helix. So looking at this, here's my helix, and I'm going to go to my top view to create this. A helix is basically a spring. So if I left click and drag it, we're going to get a circle, and then we're going to release that, and you'll notice that our height is fluctuating. So I'm going to drag my height up to about 20, and then you'll notice again that I can drag my mouse still, and it's giving me another radius to work with. So I'm just going to left click and drag, and it's going to make the radius a little bit smaller here. And we should have something that kind of looks like maybe a shell from the top view. And then we're going to right click to end that helix. Okay, so here we kind of have something that looks like a spring. So I'm going to go ahead and align this to my object. Okay, so my cylinder there. And we're going to make sure that everything is oriented properly. So we're going to align our orientation along the X, Y, and Z. Everything looks good, and I'm going to hit OK. So that has now been aligned properly. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure that this is right along the bottom of that there. Okay. So that's looking good. And now what we want to do is we want to go to our Modify panel and adjust our radius, okay, both the inside and outside, to tighten that up around our cylinder. So I'm going to take my radius down a little bit. And that's pretty close. Let's go ahead and take up our amount of turns, and that's going to create that spring around the edge. So let's do something like 16 turns, and then let's take our height up to the top there. Now notice that our radius is tapering now. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that our radius 1 and 2 are exactly the same. So radius 2, we're going to bring this down, and you'll notice it's off center a little bit. So let's align that again to our object and hit OK. Now let's pull that up in the Z direction, and now we're looking really good. So it's going around the outside of our cylinder. Everything's looking good. We may have to make some fine adjustments here. So let's do 2.5 on both of these. And there we go. So now we have this helix. It's a 2D shape, and we need to create some geometry out of it. This can be done very easily by going to our rendering section and simply hitting Enable in Renderer and Enable in Viewport. You can see that that creates that geometry. Here we can set the thickness to that, so I'm going to bring that down. Let's go to about 0.5. Okay, that looks good. So now we have our spring, and if we go to our left view, everything should match up pretty close. You could come in with that helix, and you can make some adjustments to the amount of turns. We might take that up to like 18, make that a little bit tighter. Okay, so everything is looking really good at this point. All right, so now that we have all of those set, let's go ahead and change our color and our material, just to make things a little bit easier to see. And now we have a few more pieces that we need to create. So the first piece is this cap that goes on the end. So this can be done very easily by just duplicating these objects that we have. So I'm going to hold down Shift and move that up in the Z and hit OK. And then I'm going to grab the polygon across the top and just move that down in the Z. And again, we want to make sure that this is set to local on all of those. So there's that little cap. And then we're going to take the polygons on both sides of those, and I'm going to bevel those. So a little bit of an extrusion. Let's take our height down, and then take our bevel amount up just a little bit. So we should get something kind of like this. We'll hit OK on that. And then with this, I'm going to go ahead and go to my rotation tool. I'm going to set that to local. And then we're going to hold down Shift and drag that 90 degrees. And we're going to make sure that that's set to copy and OK. And then with my Move tool, still set to local, I'm going to drag that up there. And let's center that into this object. Get that as close as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point. And we're going to pull that up. And in our left view, that should match up to our reference image. Okay, let's go ahead and make our adjustments to this. And there we go. Now, on this piece right here, this is where our screw is going to go. So I'm going to make sure that I grab both of those polygons, and we're going to inset just a tiny amount, maybe about 0.25. And then we're going to extrude that in a negative direction, just to create a little bit of an inset, and hit OK. Now I'm going to take the polygons across the bottom here, just these bottom two, and we're going to extrude those down. Okay, and we're going to do a positive direction, so about 1.5 or so, and hit OK. So there we have those pieces, and now I can take both of these and I can hold down Shift and drag those down to the bottom. Now notice here that we have a little bit of an issue. They were not coming down together. Notice how they're moving in the Y direction on their own local axis. One is going off that way and one is going straight down. So let's cancel this and let's group them together. So I'm going to go to Edit and Group. Okay, and we'll group this. Now if you're using the default workspace, okay, using this default workspace, it's just going to be Group and then Group again. Okay, so I'm just going to make a temporary group for right now, and let's make sure that that's set to local. Okay, now with the group, you'll notice that even if we're in local or view, it doesn't matter. Okay, so groups may not work the best in that case. So let's just go ahead and hold down Shift and drag it straight down, and then we'll position that as needed. I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. Okay, and then what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and align it to my cylinder, and I'm going to hit OK. Let's go to our left view, and now I can pull that straight down into position. Now I've rotated that around. I didn't want to do that. Let's do Align Cylinder. Let's turn off our orientation and hit OK. Let's pull that down, and then we'll pull it across, and we'll try to get that lined up as best as we can. Alright, so that looks good. Now I do need to make a little bit of an adjustment to the size of these cylinders. So I'm going to scale those down in the X and Y, still into local, so that way they fit onto those ends. So something kind of along those lines, and let's make sure again we're on the X and Y. And that looks good. Now let's make the change to our spring, because the radius is still too high. So I'm going to take my height down because I want my spring to kind of catch underneath this edge. And let's move this one up just a little bit. So we're going to take our height down. Let's go to 2 on both of those. And that should give us exactly what we want, and we could take our height down just a little bit more. And there we go. You could also adjust your thickness of your spring to match the overall proportions that you want for this. So here we've just created the spring assembly, and now what we can do is grab this screw in our front view. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag that out. Make that a copy. I'm going to go to my left view by hitting L, and I'm going to put this into position and then rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm just hitting E on the keyboard to go to my rotation tool and W to go to my move tool. And let's take this object and let's simply go to Edit, Group, and Explode. And that's just simply going to ungroup the objects. I could do the same thing by going to Group and then Ungroup. Same thing. So with that screw, I'm going to align it to this top piece, and let's do center to center, and let's align in the X, and then we'll hit OK. Now looking at this, our center may be a little off on this, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and we'll position that, and then we'll scale it down. And I'm going to do all 3 directions just to make this small. And fit that into that indentation there. Okay, so there we have our screw, we have our assembly, and there we go. So now all you have to do is go ahead and make a copy and put it right down into here. And then in our next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to build the tire treads of our wheel. And then from there, we're going to get started on getting everything assembled together for the suspension. So let's go ahead and right click and unhide everything, and in our next lesson we'll get started with that. So I'll see you then.